This is my 1992 BMW 5 Series. I bought it for just $1,000 and drove it 4 hours home. It may have a ton of miles, but the inside of the engine looks great and it's been super reliable as well. So I'm giving it the love it deserves and fixing it up to be a reliable daily driver. I just found a super good deal on an E34, so I am headed up to Fresno from LA to go pick it up on a Saturday night at like 10 p.m. So come with me, let's go pick it up. After looking over the car and determining it was in fact definitely worth $1,000, I made the choice to buy it. Here's a quick little 360 of the car. You can see it's missing some trim pieces, there was some damage on the front driver's side, and overall the paint's not in the greatest quality, but it's alright. The car drove home without any issues except for a little wobble that happened at around 55 miles an hour. Now that we've got the car home, it's time to look it over and see what it needs. The first thing that I noticed was that the intake boot here was cracked on both sides, so that's definitely something that we want to get replaced as soon as possible. Because of the damage to the driver's side, the old owner replaced the driver's side fender. I presume the driver's side headlight was also damaged during the accident because the driver's side headlight was replaced, but the replacement uses different plugs, so nothing's plugged in. As we peek inside the driver's side headlight, you can see that there's some damage to the frame here where the headlight mounts to the body. The oil cap is damaged slightly, so we'll be replacing that. The sunroof seal is damaged and no longer holds out water, so we'll definitely need to replace that if we're ever going to drive in the rain. The windshield no longer has the decorative trim going around the sides, which does not look good at all. When I opened up the coolant expansion tank, I noticed some nasty brown stuff in there, so we'll definitely be doing a coolant flush on this system. Before driving the car back to LA from Fresno, we had checked the oil level and everything looked good. I checked the oil level again when I got the car back from Fresno to make sure that there wasn't any oil consumption on the drive. Based on this oil level, it does not look like the car is currently consuming oil. One thing I noticed is that the rear of the car was sitting a lot lower than the front, which led me to believe that the rear shocks will probably need to be replaced. Based on how soft the shocks feel in the back and how slowly they rebound, I believe the rear shocks are blown. Not only did I get this car for $1,000, but the car also came with some parts in the trunk as well. The car came with a brand new radiator, as well as a full set of brand new LED headlights, and some European clear turn signals. After ordering some parts, I figured I'd take some time to try and hammer out some of this dent in the hood. Since I bought the car for $1,000, it doesn't make a lot of sense to pay someone else to fix it. After a couple hours of tedious work, I was finally able to get everything straightened out enough that I wouldn't have any fitment issues with the lights or the grille. One of the first parts to arrive for this car was spark plugs, and on this car that requires the removal of the airbox. This particular E34 has an engine called the M30. It was a single overhead cam inline-six engine that was in production from the late 60s to the early 90s, and it's called the M30 because it's slanted at a 30-degree angle, which is why these spark plugs are on the side of the engine instead of the top, and that's why we had to remove the airbox to get to them. The spark plugs looked alright, but they were Denzos instead of Bosch, which are the OEM spark plugs. On this car, to get the spark plug wires to fit over the spark plug, you need to remove this part. I typically screw every spark plug in by hand just to make sure I don't cross any threads. Once I can tell the thread is caught, I'll tighten it down with a ratchet. Unfortunately, while I was pulling off the spark plug wire for cylinder 5, the wire in the socket separated and I could no longer use it. Thankfully, I have another car with an M30, so I was able to pull a spark plug wire off of that car and borrow it for a little bit. And I'll be ordering a new set of spark plug wires to swap all of these out. That way I don't have any of the other spark plug wires break on me during any future spark plug changes. For now, I'll just zip tie everything together, that way the spark plug wires don't go flying around while I'm driving. The next parts that came in the mail were the parts I needed to wire up these new headlights. Instead of paying almost $100 for OEM connectors that I could only get from BMW, I bought this 2-pin terminal set from Amazon for $12. What I'll be doing is rewiring both these headlights and and the wiring harness for the headlights. It's definitely a lot more work, but on a car like this, I don't mind. For the halos around the headlights, we'll be tapping into the parking light circuit, and we'll be doing that via splice connector. To replace the headlights on this car, you have to tear apart pretty much the entire front grille. And that includes the turn signal housing, which is covering a couple key bolts that you need to unscrew. Now I need to test the turn signal wiring, which has 3 wires, to determine which wires I need to tap into for the halos. The turn signal circuit will have a fluctuating voltage, while the parking light circuit will have a constant 12 volts. You need to have the headlights on for the parking light circuit to have 12 volts, which is something I had not realized, and I spent about 5 minutes messing around before I figured it out. Now that I knew which wires were which, it was time to crimp on the splice connectors. And with the splice connectors attached, it was time to test the halos. Getting those halos working was the morale boost I needed to finish the job. It was getting pretty late and I still had to wire both the low beams and the high beams on both sides. I also had to rewire everything a couple times because I was having issues with the terminals not fully seating within the plugs. Moment of truth. Everything is working exactly as it should. Here's what both sides look like with just the parking lights on. And now it's time to test to make sure both sides are working as intended. I'm so proud of myself for not only getting these wired correctly, but saving money in the process. Getting these headlights working has me so excited to continue working on this car. I already love driving this car and I'm so excited to drive it even more. Last time we swapped out the spark plugs and wired in these new LED halo headlights. Now it's time to get some more serious maintenance items done so that I can get in and drive this car whenever I want. The first item we'll be tackling is the coolant system. The coolant in the expansion tank look pretty nasty, so as a little bit of preventative maintenance, I'll be swapping out the radiator with the one that was left in the trunk from the previous owner. After draining the coolant, I used a crescent wrench to loosen up the fan clutch and removed it with the fan shroud so I had better access to the radiator. The radiator is held to the sport with these flimsy clips that can break if you're not careful. One of mine did break, so I'll have to find another way to keep the radiator held against the support. Now we need to swap over the coolant temp sensor from the old radiator to the new one. Since the housing is plastic, I'm trying to tighten this without over tightening and stripping the threads. I'm also draining coolant from the block, which as you can see can become very messy. Since the car is already lifted up and we're draining out fluids, we might as well do an oil change as well. When I get a new car, I like to check the oil as it comes out to see if there's anything shiny or milky in it. Thankfully, it doesn't look like there's anything of concern. These BMW M30 engines have an oil filter housing that you access from inside the engine bay. Most engines I'm used to have their oil filters underneath the car. Another thing that's different about this oil filter is that it's not a spin-on. It's a permanent metal oil filter housing that you put a paper cartridge into. On these, whenever you change the filter, you also change this rubber O-ring that seals the oil filter housing. You'll find your new O-ring inside the box with your filter. You should lubricate the O-ring the same way that you lubricate the rubber on a spin-on filter. I don't know what the torque spec is on this filter housing, so I gave it about a quarter turn and called it good. That's typically what I do when I do spin-on filters. As part of the cooling system refresh, I was planning on changing out the water pump, but unfortunately this belt tensioner was stripped, so I was unable to loosen the belt. So I'll need to order a new tensioner and I'll have to replace the water pump at another time. Another part of the cooling system that we need to change out is the thermostat. Each bolt is a different length, so make sure you keep track of where they go. Even though I drained the radiator and the engine block, I still managed to spill water on the floor, removing the thermostat. I do have to say I really appreciate how easy it is to replace the thermostat in this car. You barely need to remove anything to get to it. But in our case, it does give us more room to have the fan and the radiator moved. And now it's time to install the new radiator into the car. I still can't believe the guy gave this to me for free. The radiator has some slots down below that it slides into, and those can be difficult to get right. And with it finally seated, I'm getting some of the hose connections put back on. Now it's time to get the fan and the fan shroud on, and honestly this process is so frustrating and arduous that I'm just going to sit here and let you watch it without any cuts or edits so you can see how difficult it is. The issue is I'm trying to do two things at once here. I'm trying to get the fan to screw onto the water pump, but I'm also trying to get the shroud correctly lined up with the radiator. If I had to do this over again, I would do exactly what I started doing here, where I got the shroud at least partially lined up, and then I used two hands to focus on getting the fan to screw onto the water pump. Now finally, with everything lined up, I can easily spin on the fan. And now I'm tightening it the same way that I loosened it. However, I did buy a fan clutch kit for when I changed the water pump. Since the clip on this side broke, we're using some zip ties to hold the radiator to the sport. Here's an example of what it should look like with the factory clip. With the clip on one side and zip ties on the other, everything seems to be nice and sturdy. Another piece of maintenance I needed to get done was this air intake boot, which was cracking and letting in air after the mass airflow sensor. The exact replacement part cost $200, which is 1/5 of what I paid for this car. There's no way in hell I'm buying that. I found a similar part for older BMWs with the same ports that's only $47. The fit is definitely tight because it's longer than the original boot, so replace at your own risk. I repeat, replace at your own risk. You can see here with the new part that the flexible part is entirely scrunched up. Everything fits a little tighter now, but I definitely think it was worth it to save $150. With everything buttoned up, it's time to start throwing in new fluids, starting with oil. I'm running Shell Rotella T4 diesel oil because it's the only oil I can find that's 15W40. For the cooling system, I'm going to fill it up with just water because I know I have to empty it again to replace the water pump. There's no sense in using $30 of coolant just to drain it out again in a week. With some coolant in the car, I started it up so I could bleed the system. So I didn't catch this on camera, but when I went to go bleed the coolant system for this car, I made a pretty big mistake. So this car, the way that you bleed the coolant system is not through the expansion tank. So you're not supposed to sit there, fill coolant up in the expansion tank and just keep filling it up as the car heats up over time. You're actually supposed to bleed the coolant through a bleeder screw that's in the thermostat housing. So I had improperly bled the system, went to go take the car for a drive, and partway through the drive, the car was starting to overheat, so I actually had to turn off at a stoplight so that it wouldn't overheat, and then grab food at In-N-Out where all the videos are taken, and then in the parking lot of the In-N-Out, I'm all dressed nice and stuff, and I had to go in the back to the toolkit that I still have for this car, grab the 8mm wrench, and go and bleed the coolant system in the In-N-Out parking lot before I was able to finally get it all bled out, and then I drove home just fine. On these M30 engines, you're supposed to bleed the coolant through the thermostat housing bleeder screw. And optimally, you want to have that screw at a higher elevation than the rest of the engine so that all of the air bubbles kind of, bubble up to that highest point so that everything bleeds out through that. So you want to have the car maybe on a slight hill, slight incline, so that that bleeder screw is at the top of the system. It's the highest point in the system so that everything bleeds out through it. But yeah, it's not just the expansion tank, you need to bleed it through the bleeder screw as well. After I finished bleeding the coolant in the system in the In-N-Out parking lot, I decided to do a little video montage of the car, and you can see in this last clip the puddle of coolant underneath the car. It's a little embarrassing, but it is what it is. At least the car looks nice with its new headlights. After getting the coolant system properly bled, I decided to take the car up to Angelus Crest to give it a good test. The car did surprisingly well, and I ran into zero issues while I was up there. I take all my cars up Angelus Crest because it's a great way to make sure a car is running right. It tests your coolant system, it tests your braking, it tests your suspension. It's a great way to just get an overall bill of health on the car. It's also just a great way to go meet people and see a bunch of cool cars. Every daily driver needs a working radio, so we're swapping out the stock head unit for a period correct looking one from Continental. This process was surprisingly simple. You just pull out and unplug the old unit, plug in a wiring harness adapter, and then plug in the new unit. It honestly doesn't get much simpler than that. I decided to set up mine with a microphone as well, which required digging behind the dashboard to find the best place to place the mic. This is where I ended up placing mine. If you want Bluetooth in your E34, I highly recommend this. I'll put the Amazon links in the description for both the radio and the harness. Since I broke a spark plug wire changing spark plugs, and had to borrow a wire from my other BMW. I figured it was only a matter of time before another one broke. Additionally, I need to get the other BMW running, so we're swapping all 6 wires on this car and giving the other car its new wire back. That way I can move it out of the garage and have more space to work on the next thing we need to fix on this car. Not only does the rear suspension of this car feel bad, we can see the rear shocks are leaking, so it's time to swap them out. Unfortunately, the process for replacing them requires that you basically tear apart the entire rear passenger seat of the car. For safety reasons, I highly recommend doing all of this before you jack the car up. I also need to loosen the lug bolts from the ground because I don't have an impact wrench strong enough to do it while the car is in the air. The shock connects to the knuckle with just one 22mm bolt. I used an extension to get my wrench past the exhaust so I could have full range of motion to loosen this. And the shock connects to the rest of the car with 3 bolts accessed from just behind the seats. These are each 13mm. In theory, this next part is simple. I just need to separate the shock from the knuckle. Unfortunately, Mrs. Shock and Mr. Knuckle have the strongest, healthiest marriage I've ever seen. There was no amount of percussive persuasion I could use to get them to split up. This situation ended up becoming so frustrating that I stopped recording. I also made the decision to sawzall the rest of the shock off instead of trying to hammer it. And while I was able to get the shock out, there was still the metal piece left in the knuckle. What started as a simple strut change turned into something so much more frustrating. After hammering at it for a little bit, it looked like I was getting some movement from side to side, so I decided to grab a second hammer and just keep going back and forth until I wiggled it all the way out. After hammering at it for a while, I decided to give it a shot with a set of channel locks, and I finally was able to get it out. I'm reusing this spring and the rest of the hardware from the old strut, so we need to use the spring compressors to get the spring off of the old strut. I borrowed this spring compressor kit from AutoZone like 7 years ago, and I still haven't given it back. Now we're swapping everything over from the old strut to the new strut. And with everything moved over, including the spring, now we just tighten down the top nut. And with that top nut tightened, we can release the spring. And while I have everything apart, I might as well replace this dog bone as well. With the top of the strut bolted into the car, it took a little bit of extra effort to get it to align with the knuckle. This ended up being the last thing I filmed for the night because I was so exhausted from hammering at the strut. So basically I just put everything back together and called it. A couple days later, and with a little bit more sunlight, it's time to really dig into this engine bay. I began disconnecting all of the intake piping and decided to do the ignition coil since I was already there. With that done, I started to remove all of the bolts for the valve cover, because it was time for us to do a valve adjustment. With this engine having 255,000 miles, I didn't know what to expect when I lifted off the cover. But I was not expecting it to look this clean. You could practically eat off of this thing. With this many miles, this either has to be a new head or this car was just really well taken care of. Either way, I'm feeling pretty good about spending just $1,000 for this car. To start a valve adjustment, you need to know where cylinder 1 is at top dead center. So I'm removing the spark plug in order to see inside the cylinder with a borescope. And now I'm manually cranking the engine from the water pump bolt and checking the borescope to see when I'm at top dead center. With piston 1 at top dead center, now it's time to start adjusting the valves for cylinder 1. You'll need a feeler gauge, a 10mm wrench, and a 3/32 inch Allen wrench. The spec for the feeler gauge is 0.012 inches or 0.3 millimeters. What you'll do is you'll loosen the 10mm bolt and then you'll use the Allen wrench to move the clearance up or down so that pulling out the feeler gauge feels like peeling off tape. Then you'll tighten back down the 10mm nut and confirm your clearance. You'll do this for both the intake and the exhaust valves, and you'll do this for all 6 cylinders. A trick you can use to get the valve adjustment done faster is to follow the firing order of the engine. What that means is you'll start the valve adjustment with cylinder 1, then move on to cylinder 5, then 3, and so on and so forth. So that way, you don't have to open up each cylinder to confirm they're at top dead center. You can cheat by looking at the cam lobes and confirming they're not opening the valves for that cylinder. If you don't feel comfortable doing this, you can always open up the cylinders and confirm they're at top dead center using a borescope. One thing you should always do on these M30 engines is to check the oil squirter bolts, because poor lubrication of the valve train can lead to catastrophic failure. And these M30s are known for having those bolts back up and be loose. Mine was loose, so I'm replacing the crush washers and tightening it back down. Before you replace the valve cover gasket, you want to make sure you clean the surface it's going to sit on. And with everything done, it's time to put the valve cover back on. And now we're attaching the spark plug wires back to the valve cover. And putting back in that spark plug that we removed. And now we've got to put together the rest of the intake system so we can turn this car on and see how it runs. Another thing I decided to swap out while we were here were the struts for the hood. I had the hood follow me one time while I was working on this car and I decided never again. Now it's time to see how well the car runs with the valves adjusted. It was weird. The car felt like it ran both better and worse at the same time. So I'm a little confused because the car runs good now with the valves adjusted. It just idles like shit. Like when I sit here and I come to this stop and I just kind of let everything go, it just kind of rumbles and but when we're driving, it's good. Feels a lot smoother than before. Shifts better. I don't know what the situation is. It just doesn't like to idle right now. The check engine light was on for a second. So I was having issues where at idle, it would shake pretty bad after doing the valve adjustment, and it would throw a check engine light. But since fixing the what looked like the PCV hose, we seem to be good. Car's not lumpy at idle anymore. It just kind of sits there smooth. Feels really nice. With the car running better than ever, I feel so good about the progress we've made so far. Not only does it drive better, but I can finally listen to music, which for me is a requirement for any car I'm going to daily drive. But while the car feels great, there's still more work to do. When I previously attempted to replace the water pump, I was unable to relieve the tension on the belt because the teeth on the tensioning bracket were stripped. Now that I have a replacement bracket, we have to open up the cooling system for a third time so we can finally replace the water pump and have some peace of mind when it comes to the cooling system. BMWs are notorious for having cooling system problems, so by preemptively replacing the water pump on a vehicle with unknown history, we're helping prevent future issues. The fan and the fan clutch are directly attached to the water pump, so they'll need to be removed. And this is the bracket we need to replace so that we can slacken the belt and pull it off of the water pump pulley. With the belt finally removed, we can loosen the 4 bolts that hold the pulley to the water pump itself to gain access to the 6 bolts that connect the water pump to the block. It's always a good idea to inspect old parts to see if there's anything noteworthy with their condition. This water pump was looking a little rusty, so it doesn't hurt that we're replacing it with one that has no corrosion before we fill the system with actual coolant this time. I also noticed that it didn't spin nearly as freely as the new one, which could be robbing the engine of some horsepower. To make installing the water pump much easier, I used a tiny bit of RTV to hold the gasket to the pump and keep the holes for the bolts aligned. And from here, all we need to do is put everything back together and then fill the system with coolant. First the water pump, then the water pump pulley, and then the fan and fan clutch. With everything buttoned up, and hopefully no further work needed on the cooling system, we're going to fill the system up with coolant instead of water. Then we'll run the car up to temperature and bleed the coolant system as necessary. I then took the car out for a drive and made sure everything was working right. The coolant temp needle stayed right in the middle, which is exactly what you want. With work on the cooling system hopefully complete, there were a couple more things with the ignition system that I wanted to get done as preventative maintenance. On these old M30 engines, it's always a good idea to replace the distributor cap and rotor because they're pretty cheap and they can go a long way towards helping the car run more smoothly. They're also pretty easy to get to and don't take that much time to swap out. Both the cap and the rotor are held on by just 3 bolts each. The most time-consuming part about changing a distributor cap is moving over the spark plug wires from the old cap to the new cap. It requires moving them one by one to make sure each cylinder fires in the correct order. This helps you avoid having to look up which position on the cap is for which wire. It's definitely a little tedious, but as long as you take your time, you should be fine. Once all the wires are moved over to the new distributor, we can tighten everything down. And now we'll fire it up to see how it runs. Everything seems to be idling fine, so we'll take her on a drive. So the biggest issue I was having with the 5 Series was the clunkiness between shifts. Feels like it would kind of die in between like first, second, and third gear and whatnot. So after replacing the rotor and distributor, it definitely feels a lot more smooth. Gear shifts are smooth. That was definitely something that I was noticing when I drove my 6 Series with the same engine. It would feel a lot more smooth between gears, and so now that I've replaced the distributor and rotor on this, it seems to also feel it's smooth as butter now, which is exactly what I was looking for. Another thing I've been noticing while driving the car is that the rear still clunks when I brake and when I shift gears. I've already swapped out the rear struts, so we know those aren't the problem. After doing some research, I found out that the rear subframe mounts are notorious for going bad in these cars, so I decided I'd swap them out to see if that fixes the clunk I've been hearing. You access the subframe bolts from above by removing the rear seat and peeling away the insulation with something like a screwdriver. Then you loosen the nut from below with an impact wrench or a breaker bar if you don't have an impact wrench. To get the bolt to come out through the top, you'll need to thread the nut back on a few turns, then use a socket to safely hammer it out without bending the bolt or stripping the threads. After removing these last two 13mm bolts, we can pull off this bracket and access the subframe bushing to try and get it out. On the driver's side, the metal center of the bushing had fully separated from the rubber and had fused itself to the body of the car. This meant that on this side, the subframe and the car had no connection to one another except tangentially through the suspension components. After a little bit of hammering, I was able to get it loose and remove it so I could have an easier time coaxing this bushing out. I couldn't find my heat gun, so I decided I would try and drill this bushing out. Boy, was that a mistake. I spent several hours trying to drill and chisel this bushing out. I even had to leave the car on Jackson's overnight and get some sleep because of how long it was taking. After having no luck drilling it out, I decided I was going to try and fit random things I could find in my toolbox in between the bushing and the body of the car, to then use the weight of the body to try and push the bushing out from the top. I also began using a long flathead screwdriver to try and push in the metal outside ring of the bearing to reduce the amount of contact it had with the subframe, and thus reduce the amount of friction holding the bushing in. I even used a sawzall to try and cut through the outer ring. After several hours of hammering and cutting, the bushing looked unrecognizable. There's no going back. This is when I realized we were getting pretty close to getting this bushing out. Let's fucking go! really don't have the words to describe how absurd this thing looks, but now that we finally got it out, we can open up the new bushings and get them ready to throw them back in. Instead of having to do what we just did but in reverse, I opted to replace the stock bushing with a set of poly 3-piece bushings, which are much easier to install and do not require nearly as much effort. Instead of being one piece that you have to squeeze back into the subframe, this subframe bushing comes in 3 pieces. There are 2 identical halves that you press in from the top and the bottom, then there's a metal center where the bolt goes that you slide through the middle of the 2 halves. Then you thread the bolt back through the bottom of the seat and line everything up. I had no desire to spend hours drilling and hammering at the passenger side bushing, so I bit the bullet and bought myself another heat gun to get it done. It didn't take much time at all for me to start seeing some progress. The packets of grease they gave me for this were tiny and didn't seem to do a whole lot, so I decided to use some of the brake lube I had to grease the bushings up before installing them. The grease helps prevent the bushing from squeaking as it compresses and expands within the subframe. Not only am I greasing the outside, but I'm greasing where the metal piece in the middle makes contact with the rubber. While I was in here, I also replaced the passenger side rear shock, which I hadn't done before due to how long the driver's side took. All that was left now was to button everything up and put it all back together. First the rear strut, then the bracket for the subframe, and finally the subframe bolt. To test out the suspension and get a good feel for how the car drove, I took another trip up to Angelus Crest with the E34. The clunk in the rear is gone, but the car still feels a little floaty through the corner, so I ordered some more suspension parts and we'll be swapping those out when they arrive. With projects like these, it's fun to experience the car after each incremental change and see how they individually improve the car. This car already feels so much better to drive than when I first bought it, and I'm excited to make even more progress.